Hey everybody, thanks again for coming back to the channel. This is Rocco, your host. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope everyone's staying safe. You know, we're in unprecedented bullshit times right now with the coronavirus happening. And, you know, it's all over. Obviously, it's all over in the news. It's all they fucking talk about every time I turn on the fucking TV. So, you know, hopefully you guys are staying at home and keeping safe. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but of equal importance, keeping sane. And for me, that does not entail watching the news. I already deal enough with this bullshit on my job. I'm in the healthcare profession, so I'm out there. It's pretty scary sometimes, but you know, you got to do what you got to do. And I didn't sign up for this shit to kind of cower in the darkness and throw in the towel in times like this. So I'm sticking to my job. But you know, when I'm not working and I'm at home, the last thing I want to do is talk about the fucking coronavirus. So that's the last thing I'm going to say right now. And if you're watching this years down the line, I'm sure you don't want to hear about this as well. But yeah, right now we're in March 2020. Fuck, things are getting pretty bad out there, and hopefully you guys are safe. So that's the last thing I'm gonna say. And hopefully you guys are enjoying yourselves at home. You know, for me that's listening to music, reading, doing all kinds of you know, mundane things like that. Also doing a little bit of exercise, working out. You know, keeping in shape, cooking. You know, just doing anything that gives you guys pleasure in life, that doesn't involve, you know, socializing and being in a large group. So, anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. And, yeah, so today we're going to be talking about a really obscure band called Lucifer's Friend. And, you know, I'm so happy I discovered this band. This band just took me by absolute fucking surprise. And it's one of those bands that, you know, they never really made it big. They're an early 70s band, but they did last until... I believe they did last until the 80s, and then they recently reunited, apparently. But their most celebrated body of work is like late 60s, early 70s, that kind of era. And yeah, they're a really obscure band from Germany. And the reason I even know about these guys is from Michael Ackerfeld from Opeth. So as you guys know, one of my recent reviews, actually it's not that recent anymore. It's from January, I think. I reviewed In Cauda Venenum, the new album from Opeth, which I really enjoyed, and it's the album that, my first taste of Opeth. And I was reading up all these things, Michael Ackerfeld, a lot of interviews, and he mentioned this album as one of his all-time favorites, Where the Groupies Killed the Blues. That's the second album by Lucifer's Friend. And, you know, I looked at that, I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that band before, but Michael Ackerfeld, he is Nordic, he is from Sweden, I believe. So maybe he would have gotten a little bit more exposure to a band from Germany than we would here in Canada, or in the States, more importantly. But yeah, so me and my friend, I showed him the list of his top 10 albums of Michael Ackerfeld, and my friend was also intrigued by it. So one night he actually recommended to me, hey, why don't we listen to that album Michael Ackerfeld recommended? So we listened to it, just over Facebook like we usually do, and it blew my fucking mind. Like, it was amazing. I was like, holy shit, this is like the perfect blend of psychedelia, hard rock, progressive rock. And it was unlike anything I ever heard. And, you know, coming out in 1972, you know, that didn't really surprise me because, you know, 1972 was probably the peak years of progressive rock. So in terms of musical influence, this album here didn't really strike me as being, you know, super influential. Again, coming out at that time where the market was absolutely saturated with genius music. I mean, think about it. In 72, Close to the Edge came out, Foxtrot by Genesis, and countless other amazing albums as well. So that year was just, this album wouldn't have really stood above the pack. But then I did some digging behind their history, and I ended up hearing their debut album, Lucifer's Friend, from 1970. And, man, this album, I'm telling you guys, if this was a big album, these guys would probably be up there with Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Sabbath, to a lesser extent Uriah Heep, because they're considered one of the more, not obscure, but one of the secondary bands than the big three. Because that album there was just fucking phenomenal, and a definite pioneer of heavy metal. That was proto-metal at its finest. And, you know, as it stands, I do prefer that album to this one, but I've had a little bit more exposure to this one, and it definitely is a more unique, I was going to say a more creative album, but that's not the case, because we all know that in 1970, proto-metal was like literally in its infancy. So that debut album, definitely groundbreaking. Definitely. This one here, it's a little bit more fitting in with the times of the progressive rock, but it's still a really creative album, still very diverse, and one that I'm just obsessed with. Like, I freaking love this album. Sure, it may not be the perfect album, it may not be up there with Close to the Edge and Foxtrot and things like that, but it's a damn good album, and I think more people should know about it. I haven't seen any reviews of it on YouTube, so, or maybe one, I don't know. So I just want to make people gain a little bit more exposure to this. And if you're a fan of Zeppelin, Purple, Sabbath, and those progressive rock bands from the 70s, this is like a perfect amalgamation of that, and you're going to love it. So definitely recommend it. It's going to be kind of hard to find. My friend had to illegally download it, send it to me. But if you guys want like links or whatever, let me know, and I'll give you guys some links. So without further ado, let's get into the history behind this album, Where the Groupies Killed the Blues. This was a tough one, guys. It was really hard to find a lot of info on this band. Again, coming from Germany, not that Germans are bad historians or anything, but I couldn't find any like interviews or press or anything like that regarding this band. So it was kind of hard to piece together the history and what led up to the making of this album. But I'll do my best. So, the first thing that comes to mind is these guys were from Germany. And it's kind of like the elephant in the room, because a lot of people don't really delve outside of the English-speaking world to listen to bands from other countries, and especially speaking other languages. Nowadays, it's a lot better, but in the early 70s, it must have been hard to sell albums in the States if you were a band from Germany. Now, here's the thing. Although this band is from Germany and composed of at least, I'd say, like 80% of the band being German and German-speaking, the lead singer is John Lawton, who, you might know, he had a brief stint in Uriah Heep for a few albums. And, man, this guy here has got to be one of the most underrated vocalists of all time. I'll talk more about that later. But to me, his voice is absolutely flawless. And especially on this album and the one preceding it, he stands among the greats. And, the lyrics are penned in English. So this album here should have been a hit. I mean, again, that debut album, it's one of the pioneers, guys. It's one of the absolute pioneers of heavy metal, and it should have been so much bigger than it was. So, definitely check out that album. And, it's just such a shame. It makes you wonder what other bands were around at this time that were contemporaries with the mighty Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Sabbath, that were making music just as intriguing as this. I find that, like, there's got to be more out there. But, this band was definitely the biggest surprise. So I bet you're wondering, how did these guys get together? How did these guys form? Why do they have an English singer who was later in Uriah Heep? Like, how did that work out? Well, basically, John Lawton was, he wasn't always in Uriah Heep, obviously. He came in, he replaced their previous lead singer. So before then, he was in a few different bands in the late 60s. And they were touring Germany, or playing a few gigs there. And he met up with a few of the members of Lucifer's Friend, who at the time I think were called the German Bond or something. So again, a very German nationalistic sounding kind of band they got there. And they kind of they convinced them to join. So John Lawton relocated to Germany with these Germans, and they formed the band Asterix, which is pretty much Lucifer's Friend, but by a different name. There were a few different members here and there. And apparently they released an album in 1970, so the same year as Lucifer's Friend's debut album. And I forget what it's called. I think it was called, I think it was just called Asterix. So like a self-titled. I could be wrong on that. But it's a very obscure album, and I could find very little information on it. It is on YouTube, believe it or not. So if you want to listen to it, you can. And I heard the first track, and it was absolutely rocking. Not as heavy as Lucifer's Friend's debut, but definitely getting there. So yeah, I definitely got to check that one out. So they ended up later changing their name to Lucifer's Friend. So again, a very sinister, a very dark name, like Sabbath, and the music definitely fit it. Again, their debut album cover just blew my mind. It's absolutely mesmerizing. I mean, it's so, I don't know what it is about it. It's so freaking disturbing. I mean, obviously you got the bloody scene unfolding before your eyes, but you have this tall man in a trench coat and a fedora hat or something like that, looking all suspicious. But then you have this weird fucking short Danny DeVito hash-slinging slasher, SpongeBob reference, if you guys were fans of that. Weird Uncle Fester-looking dude. And apparently they just found these guys on the street, and they're like, you guys want to participate in this album cover shoot? And they did, and this guy's it just looks so sinister. Like, who is this guy? He has like a little hook coming out of his hand. That's where the hash slinging slasher reference comes in. If you guys know SpongeBob SquarePants. Oh man, I'm showing my age as growing up in the 90s, but or lack of age, depending on who you're asking. But just it's a really ominous and really disturbing album cover. So again, at the time, that must have been a little bit controversial, and with a name like Lucifer's Friend as well. But you know, the music isn't satanic as all. These guys aren't Satanists or anything like that. So it's just like Sabbath, where it was all about like the heavy, the dark image. And I doubt the guys were actually Satanists. And the album came out, and again, I couldn't find any information on how well it did on the charts. But I did find that this album, and actually a lot of Lucifer's Friend albums, were released at least a year later after the original German release in the States. So, you know, by then people, and at that, they were released on very small labels. I can't even remember the name of the label, but very, very small underground independent labels. So not a lot of people would have had exposure to it. And that's the thing. If you don't make it big in the States or in England or even in Canada, you're not really going to make it big on the worldwide stage. So it's the sad story of a band that had so much potential. We're one of the pioneers of heavy metal and just never made it big and kind of fizzled out into non-existence. So really, that's the story behind this. And the thing about this band is these guys were absolutely adventurous. Apparently, I haven't heard all their albums, but apparently each and every album of the 70s takes on a completely different musical style. This one here, totally different from their debut. Their debut was just classic heavy metal, doom metal, hard rock influenced mayhem. This one here is really progressive, has a lot of progressive rock influence. Got the string sections coming in. You got the classical piano. And later albums would take different approaches. For example, more poppy approaches. One album apparently is very jazz fusion inspired. Definitely excited to hear that one. And they kept switching styles, which isn't a good strategy if you want to maintain a fan base. It's great creatively, and I love that they did that. But but to maintain a fan base, not so much. Plus, the album cover on this one, definitely very weak compared to their debut album. It's kind of funny because you get that dude on their debut album, the short Uncle Fester looking dude, ended up being their mascot, apparently. So like they would get him to collaborate on further album covers. But this album cover here is just absolutely god awful. I mean, you got this white cover with just black lettering and kind of like a snippet of their debut album in the top right corner. Or the top left-hand corner, I believe. I can't really remember right now. But it's a horrible album cover. And the title, Where the Groupies Killed the Blues. What does that even fucking mean? So these guys obviously didn't care about being commercial. Also, there was quite a big gap between the release of their first album and this one. Now, I don't know the exact dates, because according to Wikipedia and other sources, it just gives the year. So their debut was 1970, this one was 72, which would have been rare for bands at the time. Usually they would release 1 to 2 albums per year. So in 71, you know, that's a long gap at the time where you had the potential to lose fans, and especially at the rate that the music scene was evolving at the time, that would have been a long gap to release a second album. So, again, these guys weren't doing they were doing the right things creatively, but not the right things commercially, and eventually they just fell to the wayside. But hopefully, in these modern times, you know, people like Michael Ackerfeld, and to a much, much, much smaller extent myself, hopefully YouTube reviewers and reviewers in general can get the word out that this album's fucking fantastic and should be listened to. Definitely like an album you should hear before you die if you like prog and hard rock music. So I believe that's all I have to say about the history behind this album. One more thing is, I heard that they actually reunited recently and released an album in 2019. So super excited to hear that. I'll let you guys know how it is. Again, I don't really have high expectations for it or anything, but it's going to be interesting nonetheless to see how these guys, you know, they broke up in like the early 80s and reforming 40 fucking years later. It's unbelievable. Kind of like Banco del Mutuo Soccorso with their 2019 album. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent. So without further ado, let me get into the overall review, talk about what makes this album so great. So, as I already alluded to earlier on, this is a very diverse album. I almost want to call it like an eclectic prog album, which apparently is a subgenre of progressive rock where every song just really sounds different. And, You know, this album here, I really think it fits into that category. Again, it's very different from the first album. The first album was just based on those heavy, doomy riffs that, again, like bands like Sabbath were doing at the time, and some really powerful organ playing interwoven with the guitar, with the heavy riffs, awesome blistering solos, just everything you would expect from a classic hard rock band. And again, in that vein, very similar to Deep Purple with the album In Rock, especially with the whole organ sound coming in. And so really, that was the sound of their first album. This album here just takes on a totally different spin. You still get some of those hard rock moments. The opening track, for example, and two others on the album, really bring in the intensity, really bring in those hard rock riffs, with some experimentation here or there. So you still get a hefty dose of the heaviness of the first album, or I should say the rockingness, the metal, the metallic kind of feel of the first album. But this album also has 3 epic length tracks, each clocking in at about 8 minutes, and each of these tracks here really bring in the diversity and the experimentation that this band was really going for at the time. Bringing in the string section, bringing in the classical kind of piano tone, rather than the organ. There's a little bit of organ on the album, but on this album here, I find that there's a lot more of that classical piano playing. And ironically, it's the exact same keyboardist from the first album. I believe his name was, let me just get this right here, Peter Hecht. And I guess I should have mentioned the lineup on the album. I think I just mentioned John Lawton. So the lineup was Peter Heslian on guitars, Peter Hecht, so another Peter on the keys, on all the keys, and then we got Dieter Horns. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, on bass. Fantastic bass player, by the way. And finally Joachim Reichenbach. Maybe he should have been the bass player, but on drums. So pretty much the exact same lineup as the first album. But yeah, so the keyboard player on this album definitely takes a different spin on it. And he also arranges a lot of the string sections on the album. So on those 3 epic length tracks, we get a lot of those string arrangements going on, which gives it that grandiose, kind of overbearing, ominous kind of feel. And that's another thing about this one. Whereas the first album was heavy, I would describe this album as ominous. Again, especially with those 3 epic length tracks, it gets into some pretty dark stuff. It gives you like feelings of despair, like impending doom are coming down upon you, and some really dark stuff. And on those 3 tracks, a lot of oh my god, I can't speak today. Experimentation with psychedelia. A lot of those like late 60s psychedelic kind of experimental freeform piano solos come in, as well as guitar solos. So really, really experimental, just all over the place. So for those prog fans, if you're a big progressive rock fan, I think those 3 tracks are really going to stand out for you. If you're a hard rock fan, you still got a lot to love on this album, with the shorter tracks interspersed. Very good pacing as well. I find that this album, I love the pacing of it, opening up with a straightforward hard rocker. A little bit misleading, but definitely a good way to kickstart the album. I've seen a few differing track listings, so I don't know if the original track listing is what I'm going by, but I've seen an alternate track listing that I feel is much worse pacing than the one that I'm used to. So I'm glad that the one I'm used to is the one I'm going to be reviewing, because I think the way that album was structured is just, it's more balanced. I mean, you get 2 rockers on side 2, you get 1 rocker on side 1, so that's almost balanced. And it's also balanced with the epic length tracks. So pretty awesome. And you also get an amazing ballad closing out the album. Something that sounds totally different from the rest of the album, but it's beautiful. It's growing to become one of my favorite ballads. And the intensity at the end just took me by surprise. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, so that's this album in a nutshell. It's a very diversified album that combines psychedelia, a lot of classical piano playing thrown in there with the string sections, and some really ominous tracks on this one. Now, there's one thing I really want to get into with this album. Usually I focus a lot on the musicianship, which is fantastic. The riffs and guitar solos are as blistering as ever. But I just got to mention John Lawton. I mean, this guy here, to me, this guy is one of the best metal/rock singers of all time. His voice ranges from incredibly soulful to extremely intense, man, this guy can hit any fucking note. And on the first album, his voice reminded me a lot of Dio. So that's obviously a good sign. But on this album here, he has a lot of that Robert Plant kind of kind of sound to his voice as well as the Dio, as well as Ian Gillan. I'm hearing different bits and bites of like all these fantastic singers. And his vocals are definitely like one of the major highlights of this album. I would say probably the major highlight. On the first album, you know, I am a little bit more biased toward the hard rock and metal. So the first album, I kind of appreciated the musicianship and the organ playing and all that. But on this album here, the thing that really sticks out to me is the vocals. John Lawton just does a fantastic job. And I think this guy should be ranked among one of the greatest rock singers ever. I mean, his voice is absolutely flawless. I mean, it's something I could listen to all day long. Right up there with Dio, right up there with Ian Gillan. Just one of the all-time greats. And it's a shame that he didn't really, you know, of course he was in Uriah Heep, which was a big step up from Lucifer's Friend in terms of popularity. But even then, Uriah Heep wasn't considered a blockbuster, you know, one of those blockbuster, big, huge bands of the 70s. Even they were kind of on the underground a bit. Especially in that era, like the late 70s, where their main singer had already, his name's escaping me right now, I feel like an idiot, but he had already left the band, and John Lawton was kind of like just the replacement. And since then, he hasn't really, not that he hasn't done anything, but he hasn't really gone on to be in any really popular bands. So I really think this guy just got lost in the shuffle of fantastic singers. But come on, just listen to his vocals on this album, and you will be hard-pressed to find a better singer than this guy. So definitely one of the best singers. I just had to give him a shout out. Lyrically, I don't really know much about this album. You know, I don't really pay too much attention to the lyrics. I mean, they're okay, but they're nothing really that I want to discuss here in the review. Just checking my notes to see if I missed anything important. You know, I go off on all these tangents. Yeah. So I think I said everything I had to say. So that's where the Groupies killed the blues in a nutshell. Now let's get into the track-by-track review so I can really highlight how diverse this album really is. What a fucking badass opening track. Hobo. You know, it doesn't sound like it's going to be badass, but it fucking is. This is, honestly, for me, this is one of the best songs on the album. It's ironic because it's probably the least experimental on the album, the least out there, the least progressive. But that's not to say it doesn't differentiate itself from the debut album. This song here is just extremely, you know, it's extremely upbeat. It's a rocker at heart. But it has these little touches of jazz and honky tonk in the background that just totally differentiate it from the first album. But basically, it functions as your upbeat opener that really catches your attention. And for me, this is one of the iconic tracks by this band. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to find a more iconic song other than the opener on their first album. I would say that's probably their most iconic track. But this one here is close. So it's not my absolute favorite song on the album, but it's pretty close to being there, and I just love it. It starts off with this extremely jazzy drum intro, which really catches your attention. Really shows that the drummer of this band isn't just your standard rock drummer. He has some jazz chops to him, and that's always a good sign, because as you guys probably know by now, jazz drumming is like probably the epitome of drumming for me, but yeah, great performance. And then before we know it, we get John Lawton coming in, absolutely wailing. Again, this song here, not to compare it to Zeppelin too much, but it does remind me of the Immigrant Song. And it's really funny because the first track of their first album, the horn section, or the French horn, does definitely sound a lot like the Immigrant Song riff, which Led Zeppelin 3 did come out before their debut album, so they might have taken a little bit of inspiration from that, but I wouldn't say it's like blatant plagiarism. And especially on this song with the vocals, it's a different melody than the Immigrant Song's intro, but it's kind of like the same idea. So you can't help but think maybe they were a little bit inspired by Zeppelin. But the rest of the track is nothing like the Immigrant Song. And again, you gotta love John Lawton's vocals there, the power behind that. You know, we wouldn't really see singers trying to strive for those extremely high notes until the 80s. So again, so ahead of their time. And when it kicks into the main theme of the song, it's just awesome. It's so groovy. You get this awesome percussion in the background with the cowbell going full force, and the piano going in the background as well, giving it this jazzy kind of honky-tonk, these honky-tonk piano kind of flourishes going throughout the entire track. which is really unique. And of course, you got that your classic hard rock riff from Peter Hecht going on there, or sorry, Peter Hasline. I always fuck that up, but yeah, and I love the again, I love his vocals on the song, very Robert Plant like, even in the verses. And then we get a backing vocal section where the band comes in and they sing the line, "What can I do? What can I say?" And it's very much in the style of the 60s, which is kind of cool because we're getting all these 70s elements with the hard rock and riff and the cowbell, but with that 60s kind of backing vocal ensemble going on. So pretty interesting contrast right there. I really like it though. And then later in the song is just fucking fantastic. It locks into this heavy riff that opens up into a blistering guitar solo. I mean, absolutely ripping. It's fast, it's energetic, and it just comes and goes at the drop of a hat. And I love the honky-tonk piano that perfectly accompanies it. Just gets you on your feet, and the percussion, that cowbell again. Honestly, anything with a cowbell. Good Times, Bad Times by Zeppelin. They might have gotten some inspiration from that as well. But literally, any song with a cowbell just grabs my attention. I don't know. I'm a sucker for the cowbell. And I love the outro as well. There's some absolutely ripping licks at the end there that really end the song on a high note. So yeah, clocking in at just under 4 minutes. This is probably the shortest track on the album, but definitely one of the most up-tempo rockers, and has enough experimentation with the jazz and honky-tonk elements to warrant repeated listens. Like, this isn't like just your generic, off-the-shelf early 70s rockers. So Hobo, easily a 9 out of 10. Easily. It can even be higher, but for now I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It's a classic. Track number 2, Rose on the Vine. Oh, man, guys, this song here this is definitely a grower. Out of all the songs on the album, this one here grew on me the most. The very first time I heard it, I thought it was kind of like a psychedelic mess at the end, but now I've come to really appreciate it, and yeah, it's far from being my least favorite on the album. It's the first of the epic length tracks. This one here clocking in, I think it's just over 8 minutes in length, so pretty long. And if there was ever a contrast between a first song and second song on an album, this would be a prime example of that. This sounds nothing like the first track. This song is the musical embodiment of fucking darkness. It's so dark and menacing throughout, and especially the unsettling last 4 to 5 minutes of the song just give you the creeps in the best possible way. This song here, the atmosphere is extremely tense throughout, and if that's what they were going for, they succeeded 100%. I mean, there are certain sections of this song that sound like you're descending into hell. And again, nothing else that they've done on their debut album sounds even remotely like this. Maybe except for like the introduction of the title track on their debut album. That has a little bit of a nightmarish quality to it. But this just takes it to the next level. So if you want to hear a really dark, moody, heavy song, Rose on the Vine is really going to appeal to you. It's probably the one on the album that takes the most listens to fully appreciate. But once it clicks, it's a classic track. I mean, so good. I mean, just the way it opens up. Again, I mentioned that the keyboard player, I'm going to keep fucking up the name, so I'm just going to refer to these people by the instruments they play. He really took a more avant-garde, more piano-driven approach rather than organ on the album. Whereas the first album had a lot of that funky organ going on. This one here, it's very kind of classically influenced, but he starts off this song with a 1:40 piano solo. And this has got to be one of the creepiest, darkest piano intros I've ever heard in my life. Again, it's just so menacing, and you really don't know where the song's going. You just feel this overwhelming sense of dread. Then at around the 1:40 mark, one of the heaviest, doomiest riffs on the entire album comes in, with the and it's just a really doomy riff. You could definitely see how these guys inspired doom metal with this track. And the bass in the background is just pulsating fantastically. That sounded kind of fucked up, but anyway. And then, yeah, John Lawton delivers another fantastic vocal performance here. I love his phrasing, especially when he sings, "There's a holy man drinking my wine." I love how his voice kind of trails off at the end there, giving it that unsettling vibe. But yeah, another powerhouse performance. He's just going full force on this track, really intense. And yeah, at about like the 3-minute 30-second mark, things get really weird. Pretty much from this point to like the end of the track, there was just so much shit going on. And it starts off with an acoustic guitar solo, but this solo here isn't anything like you would expect from an acoustic guitar solo. It keeps up the ominous nature of the song, and it's really nightmarish, actually. It has this nightmarish kind of feel to it, and it's surprisingly tense for an acoustic guitar solo. I mean, I haven't heard an acoustic solo like this, like, almost ever. Usually, acoustic solos are either more up-tempo or folky. This one here is neither of those, so really interesting. You really got to check that out because it's such a unique part of the song. And again, a lot of time changes here, bringing in that progressive rock philosophy. At the 4-minute 50-second mark here, we get this frantic guitar riff that comes in with some really avant-garde piano playing in the background, just going crazy again, adding to that nightmarish descent into hell. And later on in the track, we get this again more avant-garde keyboard playing, and this part at the end where the guitars come in, and it sounds like 2 or 3 different guitars playing at the same time, creating this really nightmarish feel, and it feels like literally like a descent into madness, because it starts off with the one guitar, and then the other one comes in, and you basically have this cacophony of guitars at the same time, all before suddenly kicking back into the main riff of the track and really wrapping things up with the main theme, with John Lawton coming back in with the vocals. So a very, very chaotic last 5 minutes of the track, and something that's not easy to digest by any means, but with repeated listens, I find it's been really rewarding for me. And if you're in the mood for something dark and ominous, especially on a Halloween night or something, I can't imagine a better track than this. So Rose on the Vine, I gotta give it a 9 out of 10. Just everything fits into place with this one, and give it a few more listens if it hasn't clicked with you yet.
Forgive me, Mother, you said I'd never survive alone, swimming in and out of dreams that you could never piece together in the silence you lost.
This next track here is just fucking crazy, guys. Just fucking balls out, crazy, I don't even know what to call it. I wouldn't even call it progressive rock. The song Mother, the 3rd track on the album, it's another one of the epics. I think it's about 7.5 minutes or so. And just like the song before, Rose on the Vine, this is not an easy listen. It might take a few tries to get into. For me, it was a little bit easier to get into than Rose on the Vine for some reason. But again, it's a very, very dark and ominous track, and very unpredictable. I mean, you will never guess the directions the band takes in this track, and the amount of time change is just incredible. Often what I do is I look at the when I'm listening to music on Spotify or on YouTube or whatever, I look at the timestamps on the song and see how short the individual sections are. And when you actually look at the timestamps, you'll notice that they're actually a lot shorter than they feel. And I don't mean that as a negative, but I mean they're cramming so many changes, so many sections into these songs that it's just incredible how different it is from their first album. But yeah, Mother is definitely a very mournful song, and a very unsettling one at that. So very similar to Rose on the Vine. These two songs here are really go hand in hand. They're like brother and sister. So again, I love how this album kind of flows. And again, it's Hobo is like a distant memory at this point. We're into the fucking pits of hell at this point. So a few highlights from the track I want to mention. The intro, it starts off with another hellish piano interlude, but it's much shorter, just lasts a few seconds. And then the band comes in with this really dramatic kind of sounds like an overture, and then it gets into the main verse of the track, and it's piano driven, so definitely a piano driven song, especially when it comes to the verses. Don't really get much heavy riffing, kind of like whereas Rose on the Vine, the main verses were backed up by a heavy guitar riff. This one here is more mournful, more sorrowful. You could hear some loss, some pain in John Lawton's voice. And that definitely shows off the lower register of his voice. And he pulls that off perfectly as well. Again, fantastic range. But as his voice picks up and intensifies, so does the underlying music, which I really love. And, you know, the lyrics themselves, I don't know how great they are. I gather it's something about like a daughter leaving home and, I don't know, marrying someone her family doesn't want her to marry or something. It doesn't really matter, but musically, It's really good. And I love when it gets into the chorus, or what you would consider the chorus. You get the mellotron kicking in. So again, a very progressive sounding instrument that makes everything sound epic. I mean, you can't even, like, you could make anything fucking sound. You can make the ABCs sound epic with the fucking mellotron in the background, or Happy Birthday, or a mundane song like that. So I love that little progressive touch there. It gives it that emotional weight. And all this is before the 2-minute mark. So this is what I'm talking about. Then at the 2-minute mark, we get a minute of just pure madness. We get violin of all things. Again, I mentioned the string section comes into this track, alternating with some weird avant-garde piano. A lot of avant-garde piano on this track. But yeah, the violin really took me by surprise. And it goes in and out. And now here's the thing that kills me. After a minute of that, it gets into a hard rocking section with this really tasty hard rocking guitar lick. And this thumping, funky bass line in the background. And this only lasts for 30 seconds. But you can't believe it because, you know, if you look at this part of the song in isolation, there's no way in hell you would think that this would emerge from that crazy violin section that we just heard. It's just unbelievable. These guys were just throwing everything in the kitchen sink. But again, it works. You know, I've heard avant-garde bands like this that do stuff like this, and it just doesn't work. But it does with Lucifer's Friend. So really surprising. Then after 30 seconds, we get back into the nightmare. Again, similar to what they were doing on Rose on the Vine at the end with that really nightmarish kind of sound. And suddenly John Lawton comes in. And this is one of my favorite parts of the song where he says, "Turn off your mind and groove to the music." It just comes in out of nowhere, but a really intense part of the song. And there's an awesome fuzzy, fuzz-laden solo that comes in later in the track with this really funky riff in the background and some really funky guitar going on too. And the rhythm section is just, again, just absolutely pulsating with intensity. Really great at solo that intensifies surprisingly. Like, it gets so intense. And then at the 5-minute, 30-second mark, we get back into the main theme with the mournful vocals. And then the whole mellotron thing kicks in again. What a fucking crazy song, guys. It's definitely a highlight of the album. I like it a little bit better than Rose on the Vine. Definitely, like, if not in the top 3, in the top... Yeah, it's got to be in the top 3. So this one here, I'd give a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10. It's just... I haven't heard anything like this in my life. It's fucking amazing. So yeah, Mother is great.
Somebody, sometimes look behind the arrows where the groupies do the blues. Heavy sounds in the summertime. Chicago lights are black and black.
Next up, we got the title track of the album. And, you know, funny enough, I do really like this song, but it's my least favorite on the album. And, I think this might clash with a lot of people's opinions. Then again, there aren't many opinions on this album because it's not very well known. Again, I keep saying that this album was so influential and everything. And the thing is, like, it could have been if it actually made it to the States and had been popular. So it had the potential to be really influential. But, anyway, that's just a side note. But yeah, the title track, When the Groupie Kills the Blues. This one here is a lot different from the preceding 2 tracks. It's more like Hobo. It's a little bit more upbeat, but definitely has a lot of experimentation to it as well. The main thing I'm not a huge fan of with this track is the verses. I kind of like how John Lawton's vocals kind of ascend to something. They build and build and build, but for me, the flow in that build-up isn't there. And the lyrics don't really fit with the vocals, in my opinion. I hate that mismatch because, again, with such a talented singer like John Lawton, he tries to make it work, and he does sound fantastic. But when there's, like, a mismatch between, like, the rhythm of the vocals and the lyrics, for me, that's a problem. So that's one thing that I just can't wash that bitter taste in my mouth from that verse. But thankfully, it's not a big part of the song, and it really does pick up the pace and get really awesome later on. So... we get this unexpected flute section. The whole song just winds down. And we get some beautiful vocals. And I love the imagery and, like, something about lemon trees and Palestine bending on its knees. I don't know. It's weird, but I still like the imagery nonetheless. It's very surreal. And then before you know it, we get this awesome guitar solo. And this is my favorite part of the song. Right after that flute section, we get a guitar solo, followed by an organ solo, followed by a guitar solo. And I love that trade-off between the organ and the guitar. It's really upbeat, really intense. And I like the organ in general. So far, there's been very little organ on the album. Even the main riff of this song is piano-driven rather than organ. So it's good to get that kind of taste from the first album coming back here. And yeah, really good part of the song. Then the original theme comes back in, and again, I'm not a huge fan of it. But and then the final minute of the track is just kind of this slow burning kind of washout, this psychedelic kind of feeling. I don't know if it's guitar. It could be guitar or keyboard. Anyway, I'm not too sure. There's even a little bit of synth that comes in the middle there. I forgot to mention. But yeah, the last minute and a half of the song is just this kind of fade out, and I feel like it's a little too overlong. So again, this song here, it's not perfect, but it's still really good. So I'd still give it at least like an 8.5 out of 10, because as I mentioned, like there's some sections I absolutely love. Just the melody of the chorus just doesn't really do it for me. So that's the title track.
I got this terrible feeling and don't know what to say. Show me how to face the morning, teach me how to pray.
Fuck yeah, track number 5, The Prince of Darkness. And no, this song isn't about Ozzy Osbourne. This is a big highlight for me, guys. This song right here is just the 4-minute, hard-rocking, proto-metal. Well, I would actually call it metal, but you know what I mean. Proto-metal masterpiece. This album really needed at this point. Again, this and the title track that came before it, although I did criticize it slightly, these two songs here just really re-energized and really revitalized the album after those two dense, experimental, dark, intricate songs that were Mother and Rose on the Vine. This one here is just a guitar-driven, doomy, proto-metal masterpiece. It's just in and out, fucking like a thief in the night, and it's an absolutely killer song. You still have the piano in there, and the piano really does a fantastic job highlighting the guitar, but really this is a guitar-driven tune, and John Lawton just sounds fantastic. He's hitting some almost falsetto notes here. Again, really channeling his inner Ian Gillan, or really channeling his inner Dio, especially during the verses. He sounds very Dio-esque. And maybe I should say that Dio sounds like him, because this was before Dio was really doing that bravado, powerful vocals. But who knows if Dio was influenced by these guys? Probably not. But yeah, just honestly a fantastic song. I love the bluesy guitar licks that just cut in and out of the track. And yeah, it's just really good. Really revitalized the album. Really gives it that breather we needed. And, it's easy to if you're a progressive rock fan, it's easy to bash this song as being one of the weaker tracks, being one of the least complex, having the least amount of time changes and weird instrumentation. But for me, stuff like this is just as good as the progressive rock stuff. I mean, I love the best of both worlds. The prog, the experimental, and the intense, straightforward, heavy metal music. So, honestly, I'm happy as a pig in shit listening to this album. It's just such a treat. And, out of all the songs on this album, this one here could have easily have been on their first album. It does have that piano that would feel kind of out of place on that debut. But out of all the tracks, this one here definitely just feels like straight off their debut album. So I really like that about it. And, yeah, Prince of Darkness, easily a 9 out of 10. One of my personal favorites on the album.
The clock, eternity, man, wait forever.
So I mentioned that there were 3 epic length tracks on the album. We already saw 2 of them on side 1, and now the epic of side 2, Summerdream. Probably one of the most mistitled songs I've ever heard in my life. Trust me, guys, this song is not sunny whatsoever, and it's not dreamlike. It's more like nightmarish. So again, keeping with the theme of the other epic length tracks from side 1, this song here is really dark. But unlike Mother and unlike Rose on the Vine, this one here, it's a bit less experimental. It definitely relies more heavily on the string section. There is a long, lengthy string section in the middle that just brings so much tension and just feelings of absolute dread. But it's a really good song, and it does have its hooky moments. So a bit less experimental in those 2 tracks, a little bit more atmospheric than those tracks, rather than just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at you. And probably one of the best performances on the album, both vocally and I was going to say end guitar-wise, but I must be thinking of a different track. This song here isn't very guitar-driven whatsoever, but vocally it's fantastic, and the orchestration here, they really use that to its full effect. And again, the orchestration, it's not like they just hired an orchestra to play on this. It was actually composed by the keyboard player. So, you know what, I gotta mention his name. I can't just keep calling this guy the keyboard player. I feel bad about it, especially because this is such a lesser-known album. Peter Hecht, that's it. Peter Hecht just plays such an instrumental part in the making of this album, and Summerdream is probably his magnum opus. This is definitely one of the best songs. I feel like every song that comes along, I call one of the best tracks, and, you know, I'd be hard-pressed to rank the songs on the album. All I know is that the title track would be my least favorite, but I think out of all the epic-length songs, this one here has got to be my favorite. It's really moody, and it's not overly experimental. It's experimental to the perfect extent. And again, it's just dripping in dread and has this nightmarish quality. So just to go through some highlights from the track, the intro is basically this 1 minute kind of a ominous string buildup. And again, it really takes its time. And then when it finally crashes down, it evolves into this acoustic guitar section. And John Lawton comes out of that, and his voice starts off really laid back, really kind of like a slow burning buildup. But boy, let me tell you guys, his voice just builds up to some fantastic heights, really emotional. Like, he's giving it a really emotional powerhouse performance in this track. And, yeah, and it's amazing, like, how his voice just builds up to such stratospheric heights on the verses of this track. Oh, man, and it really, like, it just perfectly transitions into, like, passionate wailing. It never sounds like 1 minute he's singing lower register and the next minute he's just suddenly belting it out. It really is, like, just such a seamless transition. And it's hard to imagine, like, it's hard to even notice, like, you know, it's hard to notice how his vocals intensify is what I'm trying to say. Because it just happens so gradually. So that's the mark of a great singer. So yeah, John Lawton's perfect there. Just trying to remember what happens next. Oh yeah, it gets into this really dramatic piano and string section before getting into the chorus. And the chorus here is actually surprisingly poppy, surprisingly commercial. It's really an earworm. It just stays in your mind. And again, with the string section, it really does have that 60s kind of vibe to it, which is really interesting. Then we get into another tension-filled acoustic section. As I mentioned on Rose on the Vine, they really use the acoustic guitar to really create a lot of tension, which is pretty rare. And, it's really frantic. Then it gets into the long, drawn-out, moody, dark, dread-soaked string buildup. And this part lasts quite a while. I think about like 2 to 3 minutes. And it's just this atmospheric, just, oh man, you just let the dread wash over you. It's such a dark section of the song. And even horns come in at the end, and it's just awesome. So much orchestration. The piano starts kicking in later on. Before just wrapping up with the original theme of the track. And John Lawton when John Lawton first comes in, it's really a powerhouse moment of the song, just delivering one of his best vocal performances with that line. I'm trying to remember what he says here. I didn't write it down, but it's a beautiful part right there. And then it kicks back into the main theme, and it goes through the chorus again. Basically goes through all the motions before wrapping up. So yeah, just a really atmospheric and a really dramatic song, especially with the strings. So Summerdream, man, I would give this song like a 9.5 out of 10. Probably the best song on the album, I would say. I don't know. It's really hard to tell at this point, but either a 9 or a 9.5. So really love this track.
Leave your burning ships to
Did I mention this album is full of surprises, guys? I feel like I did. Maybe once, maybe twice, maybe a million times. But nothing exemplifies that better than the closing track here, Burning Ships. Honestly, this song here, I fucking love this song, guys. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite ballads of all time. And it's just so beautiful, so gorgeous. And literally, it's the first ballad these guys ever did. That's right. Their whole debut album, not one ballad. This album, nothing even remotely close to a fucking ballad, guys. But closing out this album, we get one of the most beautiful, songs I've ever heard in my life. It's just flawless. It's just amazing. And I kind of forget about this track sometimes. And then when I listen to the album, it comes on and it's like, oh my God, Burning Ships is on this. So yeah, this would definitely be up there for me. I would take this over, man, I might take this track over like tracks like Rose on the Vine and Mother and some of the earlier epics. I don't know, Summerdream, that's debatable. I don't know, it's hard to tell at this point, but needless to say, I freaking love Burning Ships, and it just proves that this band really, you know, they really can't do any wrong. They've mastered heavy metal, they've mastered progressive rock, and now they've mastered ballad writing. I mean, this song here is just beautiful. So much to say about it. It just starts off with this amazing laid-back acoustic guitar with the horn section making these foghorn kind of sounds. And, you know, usually sound effects get in the way of the song. But for me, this track here with the foghorn sounds at the beginning, it totally makes it for me. I freaking love those sounds. It gives it that kind of like dark undertone that it really needs without sounding too, you know, overly laid back, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I love those foghorn sounds. Plus, I'm a huge fan of Plague of the Lighthouse Keepers by Vandergraaf Generator, so that kind of reminded me of that a bit. But again, going off on these fucking tangents. But yeah, this song is just beautiful. John Lawton's vocals are just incredible. And I really love the drumming in the background. Again, it sounds like congos or tabla or something. It gives it this really Middle Eastern kind of vibe to it. And of course, with the acoustic guitar, that folk influence is coming in there. Oh man, I freaking love it, guys. So the song really just goes about at a fantastic pace. Just, you know, in the sense of it being laid back for the first like 2-3 minutes. Then at about the 3-minute mark, when you least expect it, one of the best moments on the entire album. The whole song just explodes when John Lawton says, "Leave your burning ships to die." And it's like, there he is. There's the John Lawton we know and love. Because so far his vocals have been very subdued, very relaxed. And again, nothing wrong with that. But when he just goes all out there, it's just one of the most spine-chilling moments on the whole album. In a feel-good kind of way. And then the synthesizer comes in, and the song's been so acoustic up to this point. There's been electric guitar in the background throughout as well, after the first few minutes. But when that synthesizer comes in, it's just, I don't know. It's just one of those powerful moments, guys, that really can't be beat. Excuse me, I'm getting a little parched there. Anyway, I love how the song ends. It has this bluesy guitar playing in the background throughout, and John Lawton is just giving it his all in the last minute or so of the song, really belting it out. It's something really special, guys. Again, something totally unexpected, something unlike anything else on the album, and just proving that this band just had so much to offer. So, honestly, this song here, I'd easily give a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10. It's one of my favorite ballads, and, you know, that's saying a lot for an album that I've only known for about 2 months now. Again, I've listened to it, like, a shitload of times, but still, 2 months is a little early to say, but it's quickly becoming one of my favorites. So, that's it. That's the last song on the album. So, again, I mentioned the structure of this album being pretty much perfect, really well balanced. You get your hard rock tunes, your epic length songs, and this acoustic ballad at the end. And I really think that the alternate track listing I saw on Wikipedia is fucking shit, because this is the first song on the album, and this song is just begging to be a closer. Just closes everything off in such a serene but powerful fashion, because again, the climax at the end of this song is one of my favorite moments of the whole album, and that would have been a wasted opportunity starting off the album with this. So they definitely did the right thing there. And yeah, that's the album. That's where the Groupies Kill the Blues. Again, I can't say this enough, but this album is begging to be discovered. And now that, you know, Michael Ackerfeld and a few other people, I think I also saw this on Banger TV, another YouTube I think it was like their early 70s show or something. They were doing some of like the most influential early 70s metal albums. So I think I saw that there as well, just to give them some credit. But yeah, mostly Michael Ackerfeld is the one that got me into this. What a great album, guys. Definitely check it out. Don't take my word for it. It's a must listen. So, thanks again for watching, guys. That's another review for me. And I don't know what I'm going to be doing next, but I definitely want to get around to reviewing the debut album of Lucifer's Friend one of these days. Because, you know, being a huge hard rock and metal fan that I am, it's begging to be reviewed. So I don't know if that'll be my next review or maybe further down the road. We'll see what happens, whatever I'm in the mood for. But again, guys, stay safe, relax, kick back, have a brew, enjoy life. Again, not to harp on this coronavirus thing, but we really can't let this get us down. Don't focus too much on the news. Sure, check it here and there to see any updates, but just try to have a good time. And as always, thank you so much for watching, guys, and peace out, and I'll see you next time.